Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our presentation today entitled All in a Day's Work. My name is Matt Usselton, and I am an English teacher here at Liberty High School. And with me is my other fabulous English teacher from Liberty High School, Miss Nakia Smith.
Welcome. Today, we are going to be talking about finding language arts connections in real world tasks. And we're going to talk about all the things that you can do that will bring those tasks into your classroom.
So to just give you a brief overview of what we're going to see today, first thing we're going to do is we're going to establish some vocabulary. What do we mean by real world tasks? And what exactly are we talking about when we say authentic assignments?
Next, we will be reviewing and, more importantly, rethinking backward design. You've probably been doing this or have received training, but we're going to take it in a new direction.
And from there, we're actually going to explore an example from kind of conception all the way to the students. That way you can see what we're thinking and perhaps spark some ideas of projects that you can do on your own.
We will also take a chance to look at options, modifications, differentiation, collaboration, all the ways that you can take a project and make it your own for your students.
Now, we know this is a recorded session here, but when we do it live, we're going to have an opportunity for questions. And not only that, we'll supply our contact information. So if you come up with questions while you're watching this video, please feel free to email us. And then we'll go over everything that we've said before, because that's just good teaching. So let's talk about real world tasks and authentic assignments. You'll notice there's not a book report in sight. So when we talk about real world tasks, what we're talking about is all of those things that people do in the everyday real world. Think about things that are both personal and job related in terms of tasks. Sending an email, compiling a report, summarizing a document for a boss, even manipulating and analyzing both data and texts, and comparing documents, offers, policies. I mean, this could be things like an offer on a house or which cell phone to buy. These are all real world tasks that students will be doing once they leave our classroom.
When we talk about authentic assignments, it is taking those specific tasks and combining them into a product that will bridge the gap between the skill you're teaching them and the classroom that you use. And even more importantly, will bridge the gap from the classroom to life. We know we teach all those amazing skills, and then yet we continually see students not apply them where they should. So we're going to think of the things in life that you wish someone had actively taught you when you were in school. The examples of authentic assignments that you can look at are podcasts, a video, how to propose a solution to a problem, a print or digital media guide or advertisement, or how to present an idea. We know all of these things are included in the English curriculum, the curriculum framework, and we've all been using these, but we're going to take a look at using them differently so that the students can take them with them once they're out of school.
So we're going to start with backward design. And as Nakia mentioned, this is something that's kind of been hammered into your head if you've been teaching for longer than a year and a half. It's that idea. And so what we want to do is we want to review kind of some of the standard definitions, but then we also want to challenge you to begin thinking about this in a slightly different way. So backwards design as we know it. Of course, the very first thing you always have to do is begin at the end. Create that summative test, create that summative project, and let that give you clear goals to both the learners, to the educators, help you know where you are going. Now, when we do this, it's usually very subject matter focused. I mean, even when it's cross-curricular, we're still thinking, oh, what project can they do? Oh, what is it going to be on the test? Once we do that, we then build backwards to skills and to text. So what skills are going to be taught in order to complete this summative? Where in the text is the opportunity to teach our kids and practice these skills? Then we create our objectives and tasks that meet that final test or product. In other words, what small steps do we need to take that will lead our students to the ultimate desired outcome?
So what we're going to be doing is taking a new look at backward design. You should be familiar with what Matt just reviewed with you, and there is nothing wrong with that plan. But we're going to begin at the end, the actual end. So instead of thinking, what test am I going to make for Great Gatsby? What project am I going to have my students do for To Kill a Mockingbird? You're going to begin with the skills and objectives that clarify success. So you're going to have a little notepad of paper, and I want my students to be able to write an email. I want my students to be able to compare two insurance policies or two texts. And then you will define outcomes for skill mastery and link those to the essential understandings from the curriculum framework that you know and should be using well from the VDOE website. From those specific skills, you will build backward to your authentic assignment and then to the text. So in contrast to what Matt just reviewed with your standard backward design, my first step isn't what project am I going to make for this text. I don't link to that text until I already have a good idea of the skills I'm going to be teaching and the authentic assignments I'm going to use to demonstrate them. So what are the obvious applications for the skills? And then what texts do I already know and love that demonstrate that application? And you don't have to hem yourself in. There are plenty of texts in the canon where instead of having our two main characters be pen pals, we've all done that assignment, right? Now our two main characters are exchanging texts. I don't care if it was 1910 when the book took place. Have them exchange text messages, have them exchange emails, have them use a modern communication method, because that is the skill that we're focusing on.
So wait a minute, what you're saying is, like in my Hamlet unit, when Ophelia gives those letters back to Hamlet, one of the things I really like to do is have the kids write those letters. What if it was emails?
They can absolutely be emails, and you can not only cover your context of your story, make sure you're getting those good English skills that we've all taught for so long in there. Now you have a chance to say, what tone would Ophelia have in these letters? What tone would Hamlet have when he is thinking about this off in the woods by himself?
So really, I'm not creating something that's terribly new. I'm just kind of modifying what I would normally do to include, I guess, what we're calling modern skills. Because if you think about it, back in the day, and I use that term loosely because the kids like to use it, and it turns out that I grew up back in the day. But what we're talking about there is where letter writing would have been an important skill, say in the 1940s and 50s, and we would do that project. Now we're looking at emails. This is great.
Yes, you take everything that you already have and you just turn it a little bit on its head. We're going to end by creating the product. So whereas backward design, like the old way of thinking, likes you to start with that final product, we're going to actually finish with that final product that meets the objectives. So what can students accomplish once they have mastered all the skills and can combine them to use on a critical thinking level?
And so this is actually going to lead us to our sample project. And I want you to know this project is not necessarily something that we hypothetically created out of thin air. We wanted to do something that at least one of us had done before, and that one of us is Nikea. And so talk to me a little bit about how this project came up.
This project, I had my students creating an event for a cause or a charity. And the driving inspiration for this, for me, with my senior students, was it was important that they went out into the world and understood two things. One, it's important to help others. And two, you don't have to make a big $1 million donation to a cause for it to make a difference. And I was really running across with my students that the idea of donating to charity, the idea of working for a cause was not something that had been instilled for most of them. But it was something that was important for me. And that was the skill that I started with. I want my students to be involved with a cause or a charity.
And just to kind of give you guys a little background, we are out in rural Virginia. We're in Bedford County. And so for our kids, that concept of charities or things like that was more something they had maybe seen on the news, or they knew Relay for Life was going on at the school. But this really kind of opened their eyes to all the opportunities. And it was interesting because as they began to dig, they began to see how some of these charities had actually impacted their lives. So for our sample project, we're going to do exactly what we laid out. We're going to start at the very end, and we're going to choose the skills we want our students to master. And for this project, we had a list of 6. The first was we wanted them to be able to compose a professional email. Now, I don't know about you guys, but here in this last pandemic school year, I have learned that my students have absolutely no idea how to compose a professional email. I tell them, "Sup, dog, how's it going?" is really not the way you want to start your email. And yet they continually send that to me.
Or better yet, have you ever gotten one of those emails where the entire text of the email is in the subject line?
Oh, I thought it was just me. Good. Yeah. They treat email like a text message. And so we have to begin to talk to them. And the idea of a professional email is important because there's tone, there's brevity, there's writing, there's all of those things embedded in there. We also wanted them to develop a budget. And I know you're probably thinking, well, wait a minute, isn't that in the marketing class? Maybe, but the fact of the matter is it's something that we in English can do, because developing a budget means you've got to be able to look at 2 different options to figure out exactly how you're going to spend your money.
You mean I'm going to incorporate my researching skills?
Absolutely. Not only that, we wanted them to plan an event. We also wanted them to get involved in civic engagement, to learn about the world beyond the campus. Seeking donations. I know that seems a little weird, but that is a real skill, to be able to call people and say, hey, you know, I'm thinking about this event, because I don't know about you, but all that stuff for after prom doesn't just magically appear. It also gives the kids a bit of an appreciation of how hard people have to work to get them those things. And lastly, we wanted them to be able to create a proposal. And that was really taking kind of all of those things we laid out before and put it together.
Because honestly, I couldn't think of a single job out there, from working the cashier at McDonald's or Walmart, to being a paralegal, to being an electrician, to any position that a person could go out into the world and work, where they're not going to have to come up with an idea and then explain that idea to someone. And we do a lot of teaching these kids how to take tests. We do a lot of teaching these kids how to think critically. We don't do a lot of, or I don't know about you, but I didn't prior to this, do a lot of teaching these kids to organize themselves and present themselves and their ideas as if they were the top of the world, as if their idea mattered 100% and it was absolutely valid.
And I know that there's going to be some kids that are like, oh, I don't have any ideas. Well, guess what? There's also a position out in the world where you have to take somebody else's idea and present it for them. And so for each skill, we want to create an objective that defines success. All right. One of the things is we can't just say professional email. We want the students to employ an appropriate tone and vocabulary to communicate with a specific audience, making no grammatical errors. Guess what? We have just set forth exactly what we wanted them to do in a measurable fashion. That becomes easier to grade.
And it becomes easier to collect your data, because you know you're going to be asked for data.
The second one we had for this one was that students can analyze multiple sources to select the best option to meet a goal. Now, that's not as spelled out as, say, no grammatical errors, but what you get is I can go to the kid and say, okay, why did you select this one? And if they can sit down and say something beyond, I just like the picture, you know, now you know that they're working through and they can lay out, well, this was more cost effective. Yes, this one's a little bit more expensive, but at the same time, I can get it delivered earlier. You know, the kids will surprise you. So that kind of starts what we're going to do.
After we chose our skills, we went to defining the end product. And this is actually where I came up with the, like, what are we going to do with this? Plan an event that combines an activity you love with a cause you support. That is how it was going to be presented. That is our end product objective. You always, as you're going to, administration is going to expect from you, what you should expect from yourself is linking the skills that you're teaching back to the essential understanding and knowledge from the curriculum framework. Now, like I said, I did do this project with my seniors, but as we all know, those skills all spiral through, and sometimes they're just worded correctly on another grade level. So my compose an email skill was linked back to utilize credible current research and expert opinions to support a position or argument under 11.6. My seeking donations went back directly to compare and contrast and select evidence from multiple texts. These students were having to go out, the students who wanted to do a walk, just a walk for a cause. I was like, your people are going to get thirsty. You're going to need water. And so they would call around and find 2 or 3 different places that had water that could potentially donate to this project. And then they had to compare and contrast the ideas. Which one was going to be better? It's the exact critical thinking skills that you see on the English curriculum framework and in our standards of learning. Then they had to create a proposal that linked to understanding that voice and tone must be developed with awareness of audience and purpose. That's one of the skills that I knew when I started that I was going to spend a good day on. How would this proposal be different if you're saying it to me, your teacher? How would it be different if you were saying it to the owner of a company who's going to be donating the water? How would it be different if you were proposing it to the charity? And that's just good English skills. That's just the things that we're used to doing every day and doing it in this different environment.
So I want you to realize that just because it says 11.6, which means it's an 11th grade SOL, if you're in the 9th grade and you're teaching 9th grade, that doesn't mean you can't touch it. I know that sometimes, particularly in other disciplines, and I know we try not to speak ill of other disciplines, but I know that in other disciplines, people are like, no, that is a geometry skill. You can't teach that in algebra. English doesn't work that way. We spiral, we build. And heavens forbid that I, as the 11th grade teacher, get a class that had to do 11.6 in 9th grade and then 11.6 in 10th grade, so that by the time they get to me and it's 11.6 time, they've already grasped it. I mean, heaven forbid.
I don't know that I would know what to do with all that extra time.
No kidding.
If we did that.
No kidding. So now we're going to roll kind of into our authentic assignments. And remember that we talked about what that looks like. And I hope that as you kind of read through here, or as you've listened to us, you kind of recognize that maybe we're not exactly the multiple choice kind of people. And so what we wanted to do with this is in our project, we wanted to combine the skills. So often, I think sometimes we teach skills in isolation and we never really bring it together. So what we wanted to do in the combining of the skills, we wanted to research a company's mission with composing and using a professional email.
So you mean before I send an email to this person asking if they're donating or whether I can work with their cause or charity, I should look into what that company stands for?
Absolutely. And if you don't want to do that, I think that falls down on you, because if you're writing to company X, and let's just use Coke and Pepsi here. If I write to the Pepsi company telling them how much I love Diet Coke, I don't know that that's going to be a good deal.
That absolutely makes sense. So I'm going to have to think about tone and my word choice and getting the main idea across, all while researching what this company's missions and goals are so that I can compose that professional email.
Not only that, if I get in and I'm researching the company's mission and I find that they have a heart for, say, juvenile diabetes, and that matches with the cause I want to support, well, then I know that they're more likely to support me in creating this fundraiser And so I use that to my advantage.
They're also going to be practicing these in authentic environments. This was a couple of years ago when I did this. I say that it was just right before the pandemic. But I actually had students stepping out in the hallway, pulling out their cell phones in class, calling local people who they were like, hey, I know, Susie's grandma did this charity event a few years ago. Can I go call her? Have students contact professionals in the field, have them email local charities and projects, the people who run the events at the school, have them get in touch, have them get used to talking to people who know more about the subject they're interested in. You can also bring in experts to review the work. So we talked about that whole budgeting thing. Why would you have them do a budget in an English project? Well, because they need to know that reading the main idea or understanding two different texts doesn't just apply to when we're reading The Great Gatsby. It applies to everything you do in life. And when I say bring in experts, you can bring in your accounting teacher from down the hall. You can bring in your own personal CPA. There are so many opportunities to make these connections, not only within your building, but also within your community.
Not only that, after this pandemic span, we can just Zoom in. I mean, almost everybody's using a Zoom call now, so maybe you don't have to get the CPA on campus. Maybe they'd be more than willing to meet over a Zoom, talk to the kids about what they need to do. And I know that we're using the accountant here as an example, but this goes beyond everything. I mean, you could get a florist if you wanted to have flowers there, or heck, even Bob the balloon guy, the one that does the funny animals.
Yeah, I want a dog. I like the puppy ones.
Yeah, they're fun. I prefer a sword, although it just never works well.
You can get support from local businesses. When you're designing these authentic assignments, go out and ask. So if you have we have a ton of kids who go to Southern Air here. That's where they end up working. And they have great jobs and make probably more money than I do. But I don't know what Southern Air needs in their employees. I know what I need from my HVAC man. I need him to come in and do the job. But what does Southern Air need from our students? So when you're building these authentic assignments, contact them, contact Southern Air and say, hey, if you were to hire a high school graduate right now, what are 3 things that you would just really need them to be able to do to make them a better employee, to save your company time and training? And you would be surprised the things that you get told. You can also ask your other departments in your building what skills they need their students to know. We all know English is the best department. We all know that the rest of the departments couldn't even make it if we didn't teach those children how to read. But we also know we teach more than that. We teach communication, we teach literacy, we teach all of those things. We can help out the other departments. They may say, hey, I really can't get my kids to get past a word they don't know when they're in a history textbook, and maybe it's a foreign word. And you're like, oh, well, let me work on some context clues a little bit for you.
I'm glad you put that last bullet in there about not assuming what's going on outside in the real world. This is huge. And I'll just share a really quick story. I have a very good friend who is a welder. And my limited knowledge of welding comes basically from seeing commercials for welders on TV and what I assume they do in the world in my head. But I was talking to him and he was walking me through his day and the amount of paperwork and being able to keep things categorized. He was telling me that they've even got this machine, like if they need a part, they have to go to this, basically a bending machine. And this is, it was tools. It wasn't a part, it was a specific tool. And you have to punch in the catalog number. You have to be able to swipe your card. And then the machine goes, oh, well, your department has used 19 of these tools. You've only been allotted 20 for the month. And so now you've got to think about, all right, keeping track of the tools, what's going on there. These are all huge skills that I had no idea went on just welding together. He works at Alltech, just welding together bucket trucks. And we need those because I don't know about you guys, but my electricity goes out quite a bit. So just getting to know what's really out there because the world has changed. As I often tell my guys who are considering going into automotive, hey, you need to brush up on your computer skills because that's going to be just as useful as your hands in your new job.
So next, we're going to be talking about selecting texts.
Yes. So in the selection of texts, we didn't want to pigeonhole you guys. We didn't want to create a project that only worked with these two texts. So what you want to do is think about texts that maybe you're already teaching or texts that you're familiar with and select them so that they enhance the project, not overtake the project.
Remember, what we are doing here is walking you backwards through how we created one single project. But if you do this plan, if you start with the skills and all of that I reviewed when we talked about rethinking backward design, you can create any project with any text. These are just the steps we took for this one project.
So when we were considering nonfiction, one of the things we thought about was, okay, I want to find some articles that showcase like youth involved in civic engagement, or youth in community improvement, or maybe a humanitarian commitment. What I wanted them to do at that point was I wanted them to kind of front load some of that information and get that idea brewing in the back of their mind that, yes, even you, a student, can elicit change in your community.
We're not removing the English from the English classroom here. We're reading nonfiction articles. We're doing those things that you do every time you read a nonfiction article. This is not a change of everything you do in the classroom. You're just taking those amazing skills that you already use to teach children and turning them in a new direction.
So have the students find things. I know sometimes that we get in this idea that I must hand you the article. Hey, turn them loose, have them find, have them read, have them analyze articles that maybe you didn't assign. You know what? Get them into manuals, have them maybe look at the how-to books, look at guides. And that way they can then begin to apply it to perhaps their activity or find out more about their charity. Now, this is not just for nonfiction. In terms of fiction, maybe you look for stories or novels where the protagonist is overcoming harrowing odds, facing a challenge to help themselves or others, or perhaps addressing a social injustice, racism, poverty, classism, ableism, sexism, all of those isms that we encounter every day.
And I bet you can, off the top of your head right now, for each of those 3 bullets under fiction, can think of a handful of short stories or novels that you already teach, you already have class copies or digital copies or a library set for your students that would apply to these particular topics, and then by design would also apply to what this particular project.
And so because I do this in my class all the time, I'm an AP Lit teacher, and invariably somebody raises their hands and says, what about Harry Potter? Okay, well, what about Harry Potter? If I remember correctly, it didn't show up in the movies, but didn't Hermione Granger at one point create a whole movement to free the house elves from their captivity?
Absolutely. There's your take on classism and poverty. And I mean, it's there. Do that English thing that you do so well and find the meaning in the text and bring it back to your project.
Also encourage your students to seek out personal narratives, seek out biographies, memoirs of folks who were involved in perhaps the activity that you're interested in, or even the cause that you're studying, or even just a personal narrative of overcoming. You'll be surprised. The kids will sometimes make the connections for you.
I always like to say that when a student says they don't like to read, it's like saying you don't like cookies. You may not like an oatmeal raisin, but you really can dig a chocolate chip cookie. Part of what was able to be accomplished with this project is allowing students to go out and find things that they wanted to read. While Matt mostly teaches AP, I mostly teach collaborative classrooms. So I also have a SPED teacher in my room. We've got a lot of IEPs. We have a lot of students who necessarily don't have a problem with English or reading. they lack that enthusiasm. It is not their favorite subject. And they get out of middle school, they get to high school, and they will tell you, I don't like to read. And I was like, then you haven't found the right thing to read. I don't say the right book. You say book to some of my students, they're done listening right there. So I say, you haven't found the right thing to read. When I can bring in a fishing magazine, they're going to devour that puppy. So in this opportunity, we, with both the nonfiction and the fiction or personal narratives and biographies, we really focused on having students go out and find text to read. You're a professional. You can teach them to find the main idea of any paragraph. I don't care who wrote it. They're going to find quality materials once they are invested in what they're reading about. And that's what exactly you have to do. Do the English teacher thing that you do so well, no matter what the text is, whether you chose it or the student chose it, you need to spiral in old skills. You remember way back in September, hey, they were really struggling with inferencing. Let's go back in and review that. You can focus on project-specific skills. Have them compare two texts, the nonfiction article that you found and the nonfiction article they found. Have them compare and contrast. What are the different ideas? What would both authors agree with? You can remediate weak areas. You can engage with extension activities. When you realize that if students are finding their own text, they actually suddenly do want to read. Hey, can we finish this up? I want to read the next, what happens in this biography of the person that, survived this disease that I want to design my charity for. Suddenly you've got this student who has always struggled in need of an extension activity. You can do these things. These are the things you do every day. I do want to point out, you do have to actually create the link for students. They don't always see the connection.
This is so very true. And this is as true in the AP classroom as it is in the collaborative classroom. You have to spell it out for them. I know that we have these pie in the sky dreams and we're all waiting for those light bulb moments for when they finally put everything together. Screw in the light bulb, flip the switch, okay? Not only is it gonna help them along, but then once they see that connection, once they can understand why we are reading this and how it will impact that, they get on board a lot faster.
Once you have explained to them a couple of times, the reason we're doing this is so that you can do that, they will start making those connections themselves. And ultimately, that's what we want. I would love for a student to be out in the world in year 2 on the job and their boss presents them with some new thing, some new idea, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, this is what Ms. Smith was talking about. I've got to look at this and figure out which is best. I've got to compare these. I've got to contrast these texts and choose something.
Because what we want to do is give them skills that they're competent in to go out into the work world or to higher academics. So when they step in there, they've already made the connection, they know what to do, and they're competent. All right, so here we go. Now we're going to design the product, okay? Students will design an event that benefits a charity.
This includes researching charities, exploring local venues, and practicing their community's communication skills.
We're going to create an implementation plan. We're going to balance that budget. We're going to have a scope of activities, and we're going to identify supports within the community where we can get not only donations, but also maybe some people to help.
Students had to create print media to advertise or support their project that they were building. This included written communication, visual design, and they had to employ an appropriate tone.
And then we had them create digital media because there's a difference there, okay? Print media calls for a certain set of things. Digital media calls for a second set of things. And so again, we wanted it to advertise or support their event. So they needed now to combine those modalities. Oh, that's a good English word.
I like that English word.
Use rhetorical appeals. Oh, now we're up into my language here. And to understand their audience. And I think at the end of the day, one of the biggest things that any kid in any classroom can take out is understanding.
So we're going to go, we've walked all the way through to now. We started with, I wanted my students to understand what it meant to donate to a charity or to be involved with a cause. From there, I chose some skills. From there, we put skills together to make authentic assignments. We connected it to text, and then we have ended with these 4 bullets, which were the 4 activities that students were actually going to do. That is our end product. That's what they needed to design. So we're actually going to take a look at what that means when we put it all together. And I started with 2 very small writing activities. We were going about our regular school day. We had a grammar warm-up in isolation. We, do your attendance, do your thing. And I just had a small writing activity. Tell me about your favorite activity and convince me how amazing it is. And I don't know about you, but I don't have a kid out there who wouldn't get involved in that. Of course, there's some that have to be convinced. Yes, I want to hear about your video game, or the fish that you caught, or the 4-wheeler that you're rebuilding with your grandpa. If you are invested in your students, they'll tell you what they're invested in. You will get some of your best writing. Now, is it grammatically correct? I don't know. That's not the point at this place. What the point is getting those ideas. It's getting the ideas down and making your students feel heard. From there, I went right into a second small writing activity. Tell me about a cause that has affected you or your family and explain why I should care. Again, as Matt mentioned, we're in rural Southwest Virginia. I've got students who experience things on the daily that I can't imagine. But that's not a novel idea to Southwest Virginia. That's not a novel idea to poverty even. You can have students in affluent areas. You can have students in a big city. They go through things. And now granted, as teachers, we know a lot of those things, but we don't know them all. If you can tap into something, a lot of people like to say that teenagers are apathetic and they don't care and we know better. So this is your chance to let them show what they actually do care about. I do want to point out that when I started this way, when I started with these small activities, the students did not know the final project. I didn't walk in and say, okay, guys, new 9 weeks, we're starting a new project. You're going to design a charity or a cause that you care about. No, I didn't do that. It wasn't that I was trying to keep it from them. It was that I needed to engage them. I needed to reach them before I tried to land this big project on them.
Not only that, I think it's important to point out that, and you know it to be true, I walk in and I'm like, all right, guys, big project, and I just watch them shut down. You know what? A small writing activity about something I'm interested in, I can handle that.
You've got to take these students who, for me, in my classroom, it is students who don't remember what it feels like to be a success in school and give them the opportunity to be a success in school.
Plus, those small successes breed momentum. And so we can get them going. So now we're going to begin to look at how we start. And there's really 2 ways you can do this. Optional start number 1 is where we bring in those texts and begin spiraling in the English skills to instill the concept that not only can youth engage with and change their community, but that, there are other people outside who are doing this. Then we introduce the project outcome first. This is what I want you to make, and include the parameters, the rubrics, the grading criteria, as well as an explanation of the skill focus. This is making that connection. This is getting them set up to be successful. And I don't know about you, but nothing gives me more anxiety than for somebody to walk in and say, oh, by the way, here's a project and there's no parameters. I don't know how long it's going to be. I don't know what I'm expected to do. That causes me stress.
You can also start a second way. And this really depends on you and it depends on your kids. And the reason that we actually have this entire slide in here is because with one class, I started the first way. And with my other class, I started the second way. My second class After those two small writing assignments, what is something you care about and what is something that has affected you, I could not get them to shut up. I barely could regain control of that classroom back from the discussion. They just wanted to go on. They wanted to compare stories and swap stories in the good old Southern way. And I let them go. And it showed me that they not only had a passion for these things that I had got them talking about, they had passion for each other's ideas. And so with that class, instead of bringing in that text and that those English skills first, I plopped in. I was like, okay, kiddos, the reason I had you write that is so that you can build a project that supports a charity. And suddenly, instead of me dropping in a project and then freaking out and shutting down, they were willing to listen. They were willing to ask questions. Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do it this way? Can I do it that way? And suddenly those rubrics and the grading criteria didn't sound as overwhelming. It didn't shut them down. That's my least favorite part of explaining any project, because it's not the teaching, it's the end part. But it wasn't so bad. And then from there, while I still had all that interest, that classroom of 16 boys was suddenly very willing to read the text that I brought in next. And if I had started with the text, I would have lost that passion that had been sparked from the small writing. What is important here is, while we are trying to give you not only a project that you can just hopefully take and change it around to fit your classroom, but also a way of thinking about making projects. We want you to remember, you actually do know your students best. You can't just take some cookie cutter idea that you found here with us or somewhere else and just slap it down on the table. That's when things don't go well. You know what to do. You are a professional. So pick the way that engages your students the most, even if it's wildly different from what we have thrown out here. If we spark one little piece of an idea of something that inspires you in the classroom, then we have done our job making this recording.
Okay, so we've thrown all this out there, but you and I both know it. Somehow we got to get grades in the grade book. And so how are we going to assess these things?
Luckily, this method has proven for me that to make grading much easier, actually. Each skill that I started with there in the beginning, sending an email, keeping a budget, making a proposal, those need to be mastered individually before they are combined into authentic assignments. And depending on how your school uses formative and summative grades, those are definitely the formative. Putting them together into an authentic assignment, that's where you're going to get the things that you put in the grade book. I collect a lot of data that does not ever show up in an actual grade book. Can they do this? Can they identify tone? Can they identify audience? Can they choose a purpose for that email? I can check all that list off a list that will dazzle any administrator. And then because of that, because the kids mastered those skills, when we put them into the authentic assignments, I'm putting grades in the grade book that's going to dazzle any parent, because the kids are invested. As per summatives, I had both small and large summatives. I have a very specific way of looking at projects. A lot of teachers that I know like to say that, well, this is my test and you're going to get one chance at it and you're going to pass it or you're going to fail it, and then that's that. And my life doesn't work that way. When my principal asks me for a project and I do my best and I take it up there, he's like, hey, I really like these 4 things. I need you to redo these 3 slides. I need you to go put this in. And they give you feedback and expect you to do better. So that's how I do all of my summatives on a big project such as this. So you'll remember there are 4 major dots, and each of those was a small summative. So each major portion. So that print media that they had to submit, that was a summative. And let's say a student did it, they did well, maybe they missed the mark a little on tone or grammar or something, they would receive an 80 or an 85 according to my rubric. That goes in the grade book as a summative. And then I give them feedback on how to fix that portion, so that when they turn in the entire project as a whole and I get that large summative grade, they have had the opportunity to correct their errors so that I never have a student fail the large project unless they completely refuse to do it, because they have to turn in the small parts. I give them feedback and they fix those before they turn in the project as a whole. And all of those are summative grades for me.
And not only that, when you do it that way, you're kind of grading it along the way and allowing them to improve. And that makes grading that large project a lot easier, because really and truly, I've already seen it in parts, and now we're just looking at it put together.
And I'm just going back and making sure you made the corrections that I know you needed to make. And that last project you zip through grading really quickly because you've already given them so much good feedback. A short word about rubrics. Have your students help you develop your rubrics. Have them pick and design and have a say in what they're going to demonstrate growth in. You know the English stuff, you expect good grammar and all of those things that are on the writing rubrics that we are provided with, but what else? How are they going to demonstrate it? 9 times out of 10, my students come up with something more challenging than I would have ever asked them on a rubric.
So we would be remiss if we didn't talk about different options and modifications, or as we like to say, differentiation.
Okay, so we're going to first begin with those students who are struggling. That's my wheelhouse. Remember the skill focus here. All of this began with that list of skills that I wanted them to be able to take out of my classroom into their lives and use immediately. The actual goal of all of this is to master actionable skills and then combine 2 or 3 skills together to create an authentic artifact. That is going to become your work in progress. That's what that's your focus for these kids. You're going to provide the scaffolding on the larger project, because getting that goal, those small goals, is where they need to focus. You will need to provide extra background knowledge. I had students who had never been to a charity event before, not a Relay for Life walk, not a pancake breakfast for the fire department. Now, had they seen the signs? Yep, but nope, that's not something they had done. So I had to provide that background about how those events even worked. They didn't even know. People have to register. People have to have water. People, you have to get the food to make it for the charity event. And then I offered them templates for the authentic assignments, again, so that I could go back and focus on the skill mastery. Then I incorporated structure that allowed for creativity. So I had students who just, the thought of the big project was too much. I knew from their small writing that they enjoyed fishing. From their other small writing, their family had experiences with colon cancer. So I'm like, okay, babe, we're going to do a fishing contest for colon cancer. Forcing that child to come up with that idea would not have benefited either of us. And then I was like, sweetheart, I'm not a fishing kind of girl. You're going to have to tell me, what does a fishing contest look like? That gives them the chance to have creativity, to be an expert. You're going to get those critical thinking skills that we all are striving for so hard, just because I gave them that actual outline of what they would do. And then I create super structured timelines to facilitate progress. And if we're coming up on a deadline and you've not started, well, guess what? I've got a collab teacher and she's going to teach today. And you and I are going to sit down and we're doing this budget. That is something that you have the freedom to do in a classroom with a SPED teacher or a collab teacher, is you can take one child and you can get them through because they've got a deadline. Because I don't know about you, the one thing I need in the world, like the entire world, from my grocery store cashier to the cable installer guy, is I need them to understand a deadline. When you're going to be there by noon, be there by noon.
So what about the guys on the opposite end? Well, this is my wheelhouse. These are for our kids that are soaring. These are the kids that took the project and just ran with it. And so again, we need to remember the skill focus. And there, what we want to do is we want to extend those master skills beyond the project itself. How can we now begin to take those skills and apply them to things that go beyond just what we're working on right now? We also want them to combine additional skills to branch new knowledge into different situations. Yes, I know that we're here designing a charity event, but what if we were to design the pep rally? What if we were to design the after prom or something along those lines? Push those kids, because you're also going to have, and that's the second thing, we got to push for complexity. Mastering the basic skill is not enough. These lovely little AP kids will sometimes just do exactly what I need you to do, and that's all I'm doing. I want to push you, be more complex. Let's think about how we can build on this. Also continue to push for professionalism, okay? It is not enough to be good enough for a high school. I need you to be a high schooler. I need you to be good enough for a college student. I need you to be good enough to go out into the work world tomorrow and use these skills. Could this be actualized? Then we want to incorporate that freedom that allows for creativity. These kids are uber creative, okay? So be open to ideas that may not be in the project details. Hey, Mr. Usselton, instead of me creating a print media, is it all right if I create a web page? Absolutely. Go do your thing, Chief. And allow opportunities for collaboration, not only among the students, but across departments in the community. Some of these kids are going to get really excited about this and may want to actually pull it off. Let them. Give them the gumption to go.
We're going to finish up here with some resources, and it's all the bang for no bucks. So all of these that you see listed here are free resources. Many of them also have paid programs. Some of them are things that you're probably familiar with using, like Newsela, Common Lit, or perhaps Actively Learn. These are all great places to go searching for those nonfiction pieces. They're going to relate to your topics, to your modern charities and events and things like that. But these are also places, especially Newsela and Actively Learn, there is a repository for students to search as well. They can go in there and look for articles and topics and things to read and find resources.
Just a quick word about Google Applied Digital Skills. For those of you who are not familiar with it, Google has created a whole website where they go through and they'll teach you how to use Google Docs, Google Sheets. There may even be a whole unit on how to develop a budget for an event. Just saying. Now, we always have heard we got to leave them with a little mystery. So we're going to encourage you to take some time and research these skills on your own.
So we're back to reality. How are you going to take what we have presented and put it into the classroom? If you want to go out and have your students design a charity and start with those 2 little writing assignments, please, by all means, take my idea, run with it, make it your own the way you want your students to make it their own. But what else could you take from this?
Well, I think the big thing from here is just the process. I know that we've used a very specific, this is how we're going to get the kids to where they are, but just that process of backwards design. How are we thinking about the things that we do in our classroom? What are some ways that we can maybe do things a little different? And how can we introduce that level of modernity and those modern skills that still meet our English SOLs into the classroom?
You don't have to give up the canon. If you love Gatsby, continue to love Gatsby. How can you use that thing, that love that you have for that piece of literature, and take it so that the students can leave your room? Maybe they love Gatsby too, but they also have things they can go out and use to succeed in the classroom, in higher education, in a profession, at a technical school, and in buying a house, in getting insurance, in having children, in building families. This is about taking English and turning it into the skills that the students need simply to be adults.
We want to take a little bit and just say thank you. Thank you for sticking through. Thank you for listening. We hope we've been helpful. You can see our contact information here on the page. Please don't hesitate to email us if you have any questions. We hope that, again, this has been informative, and thank you for spending time with us.
I hope you found something in this presentation that you can take right away and use in your own classroom.